RollingStars.com.
How did I get here? Clementine sat at the back against the back of the wall of her cell, looking out at the barred window. Her hands have been bound to hit the third attempt at punching a guard. Tight zip ties digging into her skin. Whenever she moved, they hurt as an inch. A spider crawled through its way towards the wall through the window, spotted just before reaching the metal bars. In a swift motion, it slithered right through the bars and outside. Clementine scoffed. "Lucky," she muttered, looking down at her hands. Dirt was starting to gather from under her fingernails. She thought about the man who had come into her cell for these past 3 days. John Myers was a rough man, she decided. He was definitely ex-military. The only question he seemed to ask her was, "Where are you from?" So far she'd given him the cold shoulder, but her meals were getting more scarce as the days went by. Today's rations had been a quarter of an apple and a half glass of water. Getting desperate, she thought. Before she could develop any further in her thoughts, she heard the creaking of the metal door, and a new man entered. He was tall with a short stubble covering the bottom of his face. He wore a white lab coat over the blue button-up shirt. Clementine straightened up at the sight of him, raising an eyebrow. "You're new," she drawled in the bored tone. "Good observation," the man replied with a smile, taking a seat at least on one of the chairs. He wrote something into a clipboard that he held in his hands, his eyes never leaving the paper. Clem noticed at the top of his scar producing from his shirt, "New Frontier." She braced herself for the usual question, already rolling her eyes. "How old are you?" the man asked, instead making Clem double take. She blinked a couple times before he repeated his question. "I'm 21, she said hesitantly. There was no reason to lie about that, was there? He wrote down something on the clipboard and nodded to himself. "My colleagues have reported that you've been throwing up. Is that true?" "What does that have to do with anything?" she snapped, rolling her eyes again. "I thought you guys only cared about where I lived, which I'm not telling you." "That's okay. I'm not here for that," he assured her, smiling gently. "I noticed that you've also refused the fruit we've been giving you." "Again, considering the source, that's pretty obvious," she retorted. The man seemed to be finding the answer that he'd been looking for, because he looked down at the clipboard with a chuckle. "That's so funny. That's not the only reason why you've been injecting food, isn't it?" Clementine stared at the man, piercing her lips. She had been a bad feeling about him. He had a nice personality, but years on the road she had taught her never to trust people like that. He was actually right. Unfortunately, this baby was not too fond of fruits, and she was having a hard time keeping them down. So she decided to stay quiet, which the man took as a positive answer. For a second he looked at uncomfortable. Clementine raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" she prompted, sitting back up. "Are you sexually active?" he asked, his voice getting lower. Clem frowned and stared at him. "What?" she exclaimed. "Well, I just need to know that," he said, a matter of fatality. "See, you're showing signs of early pregnancy," he exclaimed, seemingly reading it from the clipboard. "Am I?" she asked, her hands on her stomach, was trying to be accomplished. "We just want to be sure," he said calmly, setting the clipboard down on the chair beside him. "Wouldn't want to be treating a pregnant woman with violence now, do we?" "I have a feeling Myers wouldn't care any other way," Clem retorted, squinting. She raised her arm and showed the man the cut on her forearm. Dried blood stuck to her skin, some of it staining her sleeve. "I'm terribly sorry about that, dear," the man said, shaking his head. "John could be quite overzealous at sometimes." "Crazy would be a better word to put it, but okay." "Perhaps," he conceded with a small grin. "But there is a reason we have survived all this long." Clem frowned and looked down at her metal hands. "If he is so great, why did he feel that he needed to take me?" At the question, the man raised an eyebrow and looked at Clementine, eyeing her up and down. Without a word, he stood up and walked towards the door. Before he stepped out, he dug into his lab coat and placed a small box in a nearby chair. "I would ask you to take this test, please," he said over his shoulder. Without another word, he closed the door behind him, leaving Clementine in the dim light of the morning. Clem eyed the box from her spot on the other side of the room, piercing her lips. What would it matter if she was to tell them if she was pregnant? What could they gain? She rubbed her belly gently, a habit she had picked up after being trapped for 4 days. You'll be fine, little one, she whispered. I promise we're getting out of here. She thought about her boys back at home. Louis would probably be thumbing in search of way to find her. AJ was probably the one who was most worried about. She was the only mother he knew his entire life, and this would be the second time they were apart for an extended period of time. Remembered how reckless she had been 8 years ago when she thought AJ was dead. She hoped to know better now. Looking out of the window into the bright blue sky, she sighed. I hope you guys are okay. You okay, man? Javier asked Louis after about an hour of silence from the freckled man. Honestly, no, he replied, looking down at his hands. Lizzie was sitting in the back again, keeping herself to herself. Louis had made a point that stays as far away from her as possible the night before. What do you mean? Javi inquired, raising an eyebrow. Aren't you glad we know where Clem is? I'll only know we'll be okay is when we actually find her, Louis said, looking up at the sky. The sun was just beginning to come out from the east, a light yellow hue colorizing the sky. Maggie had allowed them to stay the night for the rest of the trip ahead. Fro Louis had been done anything but resting. At his statement, they restored to silence for the rest of the ride and to Richmond. They passed a few walkers on the road, most of them lazily droning their way to the sound of the engine. When they arrived, Javier waved his arms at the guards who let the leader in. He parked his car with the rest, and Louis made his way to the room. Walking in, he expected to hear AJ's laughter or Clem's smoothing voice. Instead, he was greeted with an empty room. It almost seemed like he was mocking him. He thought by this point AJ would already be in Erickson with Violet and the rest, so he wasn't so worried about him. He wondered what Asim and the rest of the school would make of their precarious situation. He sat on the edge of his bed, rubbing his eyes furiously. His thoughts drifted to Lizzie's kiss back in the mission. What the hell was she thinking? He had unknowingly been leading on her on. He debated with himself whether or not he should tell Clem. Of course you should, dumbass, he told himself. After all, he told Clementine everything. He laid back on the mattress, the springs creaked under his weight, releasing a small cloud of dust beneath the bed. He took a deep breath, telling himself that Clementine was the stronger person, and he knew that he'd be able to find a holdout for him. He had to find her. He had to. Due to his lack of rest the night before, he slept quickly overtook him. The dream of Clementine and the time they'd been taking a day off to go to the lake that was near the school. After what felt like barely 2 minutes, he was shaken awake by none other than Lizzie herself. She stood over his bed with a plain expression. At some point, she changed from the blood-covered tank top into a more comfortably baggy jersey. Her face softened when he yawned and stretched his arms, looking around groggily. How long did I sleep? He asked, the thought of wasting more time than necessary weighing in his mind. He noticed the sunset sleeping through the window on his right. At least it was still the same day. Around 5 hours, she said, glancing at her watch. Javi said to come and get you for the briefing. He wants to discuss the plan with you. He looked up, noticing just how much she wouldn't meet his gaze, muttering a thank you. He got up and brushed past her. Their recent encounter was far too fresh in his mind, and the last thing he wanted was to hear her longer than he had to. He rushed to Javier's office, where he and his nephew were already examining the map. They overlooked at him, and Javi nodded. Glad you could come. Louis nodded, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes and sitting down at the desk. It was on the map that Maggie marked for them. 3 pins are attached to it. Javier pointed out one of them to the farthest north, saying that Erickson, the biggest one, was in Richmond, surrounded by the map and the walls, and a circle of walls. On the north side of the map was circled in red ink. That was the 3rd pin, representing the rough location of the right arm's base. Lizzie said you had something in mind, Louis said, the woman's name burning in his mouth. Javier looked at him for a second in the moment, and then nodded at Gabe. The young man had turned and opened a locked cupboard, using a key strapped to his belt. He took something out and set it on the desk beside Louis. There were 2 bulky walkie-talkies. These are military-grade walkie-talkies, Javier explained, taking one of them in his hand and clicking the button on the side, and soft static emanated from it. They can reach distances over 50 clicks and come with solar panels so they wouldn't run out of batteries. He flipped the small lid and revealed his 3 small little panels for Lewis to see. We don't normally use these for normal missions, as we never have to go outside 5 to 10 clicks per mirror from our walls, Gabe said, crossing his arms. Plus, these are the only ones we have. Javi handed one to Lewis, who turned it to his hands, and then he looked up at the 2 men and then down to his eyebrows as he raised. How will this help us find Clem? We can't go on a mission blind, Lewis. Even a rescue one, Javi said, leaning against the wall. He pointed at the mark circled the wrap. You and I will go to the area and scout the terrain. We'll use these to let Gabe know when we're up against next, and he'll be mapping out where we would report from the guard. You sure you can handle that? Lewis questioned, looking at Gabe. Hey, I said I'm sorry, man. Gabe defended himself, looking down. I'm trying to do right by Clem. Whatever, Lewis muttered. Sensing the growing tension in the air, Javi cleared his throat, bringing the argument close. The trio discussed more recognition on the mission, Lewis eagerly pointing out the possible alternatives for everything. He was glad that he was able to finally be actively working on the plan to get Clem back. With no idea what they could be doing to her and his baby, he was getting more worried by the minute. This plan should work, though. It was a reassurance that he kept repeating in his head like a mantra. After about 30 minutes, they went over the basics. Lewis and Javier would take the car to the edge of the marking area and hiding it with a trap with a tarp and leaves, though Javi did not like the idea of leaving it unattended. But they couldn't just walk in the place, as Lewis reminded him the time of his essence. As it was decided, Gabriel would be staying behind in Richmond, jotting down whatever information Javi and Lewis get from shouting of the place. It was a 10-mile wide area with mostly plain grounds. According to Javi, none of their hunting parties ever got that far so north, so they had no idea what to expect. Satisfied with their progress, Javi jotted down the trails that they would be taking on the map. Lewis kept fidgeting with his hands, looking up at the map with his 10th eyes. He was trying to find a flaw in their planning, a weakness that would offset their plans that would lead into Clementine staying there longer. He willed his brain not to think about that. Javi placed a comforting hand on the freckled man's shoulder, his soft brown eyes meeting Lewis's features. This is gonna work, Lewis. I know it is, Lewis replied, looking up at him with determination. He made an effort to try to keep his voice steady. 'Cause I don't know what I'm gonna do if it doesn't.
Why, hello there, my little pretties. It's me, the Shadow Lioness. I hope you all enjoy my video of creepypasta. So, without further ado, if you liked the video, please leave a like. And if you want to survive my cave of terror, please hit the subscribe button down below. Leave a comment in the comment section down below. Donate to my Patreon when you can. And the only way you're going to survive me in the cave is you're going to have to sub to me and press the bell for notifications so you'll get to know when I upload. Well, without further ado, my little pretties, I'll see you in the next